What's up everyone on the internet? Thank you for making this video party. I'm so excited to upload this one for you guys because for this video we'll be taking out possibly one of the greatest films of all time, Gladiator. So this movie came out back in 2000, and now that I think about it, this movie is about 22 years old and it still holds up, which is funny because as a kid I actually remember growing up watching this film, but only bits and parts of it. But that's only because either my parents or some relatives of mine were watching it in the background, so I'd always watch small little pieces of it, but never the entire thing. It wasn't until I was a little old enough to where I actually watched the movie from beginning to end, and once I finished watching it, I was just blown away. As someone who grew up watching the Star Wars prequels, watching a movie that is set in ancient Rome, we follow a soldier's story that ultimately takes him into the gladiatorial arena, that sounded pretty epic to me as a kid. But as a kid, I always found the arena much more interesting than the politics side of the film, but that was mostly because of most of the fight scenes, and as a kid, I just loved playing with toy swords. Looking back at this film as an adult, I can now see that there are also multiple sides to this story rather than just being a swashbuckling revenge film. Anyway, the movie's been out for more than 20 years, so I'm not worried about spoiling anything at this point. But like I said, this movie came out back in 2000 and is considered to be Ridley Scott's finest work as he tells the story of Maximus, who was Rome's greatest general before he became a gladiator in order to liberate Rome. And one of the cool things about the making of this film was what actually sparked Ridley Scott's interest into making this project was a painting done by Jean-Léon Gérôme called Police Verso, or Turned Thumb. In the painting, we see a gladiator standing over another as he looks towards the crowd who is shouting at him with their thumbs turned down, showing us that they all want to see the fallen gladiator die in order to satisfy their thirst for entertainment. At the same time, we also see the Emperor of Rome sitting in the background looking very unamused, but ultimately has the power to determine the outcome of this fight. But we can clearly see how the crowd has a huge influence on what's about to happen in this arena. And just by looking at this painting alone, Ridley Scott already figured out what kind of story he wanted to tell. Now when you look at this film, in comparison to others that depict ancient Rome, like Ben-Hur, there has to be a sense of grand and epic nature to it. So with that in mind, a lot of the sets in this film were made to scale. And one of the things that I really like about this movie is how Ridley Scott really wanted to make this as realistic as possible while using very few visual effects in order to cheat the scene. So when you see these gladiators run into the arena, you are in shock just as they are as you see the grand scale of this arena, that most of it was actually built using very few CGI in order to fill in the gaps, and yet it feels all real. Okay, enough with the technical stuff. Let's talk about the story. So like I said, this movie set in ancient Rome, where the story starts us off with Rome finishing off the last of the barbarians of Germania who are standing in between Rome and a long-lasting peace within the empire. Side note, one of my favorite barbarians in history who fought against Rome when they were at the height of their power was Arminius of Germania, who was actually the son of a tribe leader who offered him as tribute to the Roman Empire when he was just a kid. And as he grew up, he started to work his way up the ranks within the Roman army and became one of Rome's top generals. And once he got stationed back to Germania in order to repeat the process all over again, he decided to go turncoat, go against the Roman Empire, and use their own tactics against them, and he was able to beat Rome and liberate Germania. That's pretty insane because after that defeat, that was the beginning of Rome's downward spiral to destruction as they began to suffer loss after loss after loss, and it all began when they lost Germania. Anyway, I love learning about that sort of stuff, but let's get back to the movie. So prior to the big battle at the beginning of the movie, which is so freaking awesome to open up this story with a grand epic battle, you were introduced to Maximus Decimus Meridius, who is considered to be Rome's greatest general. And right off the bat, you can see that this is a general who is clearly high enough the ranks where he doesn't have to take part in this battle. And yet, he still decides to stand side by side with his men and fight with them in the cold mud. At the same time, when you first see him rub dirt on his hands, you can tell this guy has years of experience behind him, who is so tired from all the constant battles he has fought and just wants to go home now. Anyway, the battle starts, people are dying left and right, and one of the things I liked about this movie were how the fights choreographed. Because watching the behind the scenes footage, there were some fights that were meant to last a little longer because they wanted to provide some sort of spectacle for entertainment purposes, but in reality, it's not really practical, which is what Ridley Scott wanted. Why spend so much time punching a dude in the face, then push him so that he can get into another fight stance, and then we'll start another fight, when I can just beat this guy to a pulp and then cut his head off before moving on to another guy. So it's nice to see how this movie wants to get a really good visual idea of just how graphic and realistic these fights were at the time. Fast forward after the battle, we come across Commodus and Lucia, who are Emperor Marcus Aurelius' children. And right off the bat, you can see how being emperor takes a toll as you see the relationship that Marcus Aurelius has with his two children. For Lucia, in a perfect scene, you could see the relationship she has with Marcus Aurelius when he says to her,
"Enough of politics. Let us pretend that you are a loving daughter and I am a good father."
From that conversation alone, you can see how Lucia really wished that her father was there during her childhood, but because he was too busy expanding the empire, he wasn't really there when she needed him the most. As for Commodus, who was played magnificently by Joaquin Phoenix, one could say that he is the most tragic character of this story, because here's someone who's worked his whole life trying to live up to his father's expectations, only to learn that he's not going to be emperor. Instead, Maximus is going to be emperor, who doesn't even want the job in the first place because all he wants to do is go back to his family. And the whole driving force of the entire story is for Maximus to come home to his family. Anyway, in one line, you can see the tragic relationship that Marcus Aurelius has with his own son when he says to Commodus,
"Commodus, your faults as a son is my failure as a father."
Okay, let that line sink in a little bit, because that cuts deep into the parent, because hearing a parent say to their child that the reason why they're all messed up is because of them. Right here, you can see how some people would sympathize for Commodus, but it's what comes after this moment where you see Commodus start his downward spiral into madness when he kills his own father to become emperor. And right when this is happening, Maximus is starting to see his circle of trust grow smaller and smaller and smaller. And by the time he makes a move, Commodus already orders him to be executed along with his family. Well, he manages to escape, but it's too late to save his family. So what was once a story of a soldier trying to get back to his family is now a revenge film where Maximus goes on a journey to kill Commodus. And this journey takes us to the far reaches of the empire as we see Maximus, who was once a great general, now become a slave and then soon become a gladiator in a backwater village. When you cut back to Commodus, right off the bat, you can clearly see that this guy is not fit to be emperor, as the Senate is starting to crumble from within due to corruption, and the people of Rome are starting to form a mob against their own government. So what better way than to gain the people's love while at the same time distract them from their own failing government than to host 150 days of games held at the Grand Gladiatorial Arena. As the movie puts it in one famous quote,
"The beating heart of Rome is not the marble of the Senate, it's the sand of the Colosseum. You bring them death, and they will love him for it."
But going back to Maximus, once he starts winning the crowd over and at the same time gaining the trust of all the gladiators, everyone is called back to Rome for these games. And this gives him the perfect opportunity. If he can win the crowd, then he'll definitely win audience with the emperor and will most likely kill Commodus. Ultimately, he manages to do so, but once he reveals himself in the most OP way, Commodus literally craps his pants, because here's someone who can pretty much undo everything that he has done.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix legions, loyal servant to the true emperor Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
Well, Commodus wastes no time at all as he quickly orders his guards to execute Maximus and his men. But because Maximus won the crowd over, the emperor is forced to spare them. It's right here where we see life imitate art, as we see this scene play out very similarly to what was seen in the painting that inspired this film. It just goes to show you that in any government, the voice of the people can have a huge influence. So going back to the movie, from the second act to the third act of the film, we are watching a battle between Maximus and Commodus, where Commodus is just throwing everything at Maximus, and Maximus is just plowing through in order to get to Commodus. ultimately the threat of the film leads us with these two going toe-to-toe with each other. But after watching most of the film, you can clearly determine that in a straight-up fight, Maximus would wipe the floor with Commodus. So what does the Emperor do? He cheats. But even with a mortal wound, Maximus is still able to gain the upper hand, and in a very well choreographed fight scene, we see these two clash swords with one another. And now I think about it, this may be one of my favorite sword fights that we've seen on film. But anyway, once the fight ends, where Maximus ultimately kills Commodus in the most grotesque way, he then dies of his wounds, and watching these two lie side by side one another, it's very poetic. It's also beautiful to see this story return back to its original form as we see this soldier return to his wife and son by the end of the movie. And the music, oh my god, aside from John Williams, Hans Zimmer is one of the greatest composers of all time. When he scored the song Now We Are Free, Lisa Gerrard, who sings the vocals of that song, was in utter tears after the recording session. I want it stated right here that I want Now We Are Free by Hans Zimmer to play at my funeral. After that morbid note, I love how this film takes us on a journey as we see a general become a slave, the slave become a gladiator, and the gladiator who defied an empire. And now that I think about it, there is nothing wrong about this movie. Which is crazy because when I do most of these videos, I'll normally find something that I didn't like about the movie or TV show that I just watched. But after watching Gladiator, this film is utter perfection when it comes to grand storytelling. I'll go as far as to say that this film makes my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So if you're looking for something to watch tonight, watch Gladiator. Well, that's going to do it for this video, guys. That was my overall review for Gladiator. If you like what you saw, click the subscribe button to see all these updates from this channel. I'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye-bye.